Welcome to On the Agenda, Steptoe's guide to state attorneys general and other enforcement, regulation, and compliance matters. From AI to smokestacks, consumer protection to financial services, data privacy to antitrust. Join Steptoe's seasoned litigators, counselors, and advisors as they deliver the critical insights and industry knowledge that government officials respect and that companies, nonprofits, and executives can use to navigate whatever legal challenges they face.
Eric, it's our first episode of On the Agenda.
I love it, Michelle. So excited.
Well, we are thrilled to be here. My name is Michelle Kallen. I am a partner in Steptoe's Washington, D.C. office, and I co-head our appellate practice. I come to Steptoe by way of the state AG world. I served in the Virginia Office of the Attorney General as Deputy Attorney General, and then as Solicitor General. And I am thrilled to be joined today by my partner, Eric Berman.
Thanks, Michelle. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really excited that we're getting this podcast off the ground. Hi, everyone. Eric Berman, also a partner in Steptoe's DC office. I practice in our consumer litigation group. I appear before the state attorneys general, as you might imagine, the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice. Wonderful to be here.
Our guest today is Nevada's 34th Attorney General, Aaron Ford. General Ford, welcome to our inaugural episode of On the Agenda. We are thrilled to have you here today. So I want to start out by some introductory questions. Can you give our listeners a brief overview of your office's responsibility and your role as Attorney General of Nevada?
Sure. But first, let me say, Michelle, thank you so much for having me on. It is great to be here with you. And Eric, great to see you, sir. My honor and my delight to be here. I am Aaron Ford, like you said, the Attorney General for Nevada. Less than honored to be able to serve in that capacity. And, you know, in a phrase, you can call me the people's lawyer. We have a few jobs, but one of them is certainly being the people's lawyer, defending and representing Nevadans, the entirety of what I call the entirety of the Nevada family, from anything and everything that might have a negative or detrimental impact on it. So whether it's in the consumer protection arena or in the criminal justice arena or in the constitutional arena, you name it. We're looking at opportunities to represent the constituency here and the entirety of the Nevada family. Now, we're also called the top top law enforcement agency in the state, where I mentioned the criminal justice stuff. We do have limited jurisdiction, so it's somewhat of a misnomer to say top cop because I don't have full and plenary authority in that area. We have limited criminal jurisdiction, but you know, when it comes to elder abuse and insurance fraud and Medicaid fraud, things of that sort, we get engaged on the criminal side and ensure that we hold our laws in that arena. But we also stand as an entity that protects the sovereignty, as I said, in Nevada, from federal overreach. And that's irrespective of who's in the White House. Absolute presidents of both parties and have won in lawsuits against presidents from both parties for federal overreach. And at the end of the day, that's an important component of this job, one that I really like, one that I appreciate. And then, you know, the last thing I'll say is just serving as the Attorney General, being able to know that we focus on our job. And if you'd ask anybody in my office, they can tell you in unison, our job is justice and in every component that you can think of.
What are some common misconceptions about the work of a state attorney general?
Well, you know, I would say probably depends on the jurisdiction, right? I say we're the top cop, and some folks think that we have more criminal jurisdiction than we do. Some jurisdictions have complete criminal authority. They are like the district attorney for the entire state. Delaware is an example. I think Rhode Island might be an example. I could be wrong on that, but certainly Nevada is not. We have local district attorneys who do, for lack of a better phrase, run-of-the-mill criminal matters like the murders that take place on the streets or the burglaries that take place on the streets, things of that sort. My office engages in, as I've indicated, insurance fraud, Medicaid fraud, and a few other things. But we do deal with murder, but when it happens in our federal prisons, in our state prison systems, right? And so that's one of the misconceptions. Another misconception is that, you know, we are like the boss of every legal entity in the state. I mean, we have district attorneys, to be sure, and they are elected and we engage, but I'm not their boss, right? And so we'll get a phone call sometimes about something that people have questions about in someone else's jurisdiction. And I think that's a misconception, but it's one where, you know, we kind of embrace that as an opportunity to continue to assist our constituencies and refer them to the right folks. Those are a couple of examples, I think.
That's great. And in terms of your relationship with the local district attorneys, they make the charging decisions typically if something's within their jurisdiction?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we make charging decisions for things that are in my jurisdiction. They make their own. I frankly can't think of one time where we have overlapped in my tenure, and I'm pretty doubtful that has been an overlap in criminal issues between the district attorney and the AG. Now, what we do what's called deconflict, where there may be some overlapping in the jurisdiction, and one entity or another may take the case, but it is not a joint case in that arena. Now, we may have joint investigations, but only one agency is going to take over the criminal prosecution of a matter.
And what about on appeal? Do criminal appellate issues go over to the AG's office, or do local authorities handle their own appeals?
It kind of depends on what the appeal is about, but we do what's called post-conviction work. So if someone has been convicted, then they are appealing. It's post-conviction work, habeas petitions and things of that sort. I have a whole team that works on habeas petitions, both at the state level and at the federal level. And that's predominantly our work, where we're trying to defend the work of a district attorney, work done in the name of the state, from being reversed on appeal. And that's predominantly the work that we would do. That's civil work, though. That's not criminal work. That's civil-oriented work where we, again, are defending the decision of a court, having been prosecuted by a state entity.
Right. And that can be either in state or federal court.
Yeah. I mean, we have a robust federal practice. And a lot of times it always starts in state court. I shouldn't say always. A lot of times things start in state court. And I don't practice in the area, but my understanding is it'll start in state court and it'll proceed through the exhaustion of remedies at the state level. And then it'll flip over to the federal courts. And then we will operate in that arena as well, all the way up to and including the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court.
And in your role as SG, what sorts of interactions do you have with other state attorneys general?
Plenty. Some of it is bipartisan. A lot of it is bipartisan. Some of it is, based on party affiliation through organizations that we're engaged in. But there are two nonpartisan / bipartisan Attorney General associations. One is called the National Association of Attorneys General. The other is called the Attorney General Alliance. And we get together as Democrats and Republicans and independents on several occasions throughout the year to convene and talk about important issues that we can work on. Consumer protection is one of the main issues where you will find some overlap of bipartisan support in the opioids context, for example. The social media context, where we have joined together in multi-state litigation to protect and defend the constituencies of our respective states, but in a joint piece of litigation. And then you have separate, partisan organizations, the Democratic Attorneys General Association. I'm a Democrat. and so I'm a member of that organization and am the immediate past co-chair of that association. You have the Republican Attorney General Association, and they convene with meetings as well. But there's always an overlap and conversation and interaction, and it's one of the parts of the job that I really look forward to.
And in AJ parlance, those are the Republican Attorney General Association, or is RAGA, right? And the Democratic Association of Attorneys General, or Democratic, right? It's DAGA.
DAGA, right.
Everybody's got their acronyms.
Right.
It's great to see you, General Ford. In your last answer, you sort of anticipated where we were going next when you mentioned social media, opioids. I know that our audience would love to hear from you about your office's top litigation priorities, enforcement priorities. You use the term top cop on the beat. Maybe that's metaphorical. Maybe it's literal. Certainly the top consumer protection officer of the state. If you could, tell our audience what your office is prioritizing these days, we'd love to know.
Yeah, it's hard to say what we quote unquote prioritize because there's so many things we work on, and they're all priorities, right? At the end of the day, we focus on the job being justice. We say our job is justice. We focus on it in my office through what we call the lens of our 5 C's, consumer protection being one, criminal justice and reform being the second C, constitutional law and protections of everyone's rights is one of the C's, client services, both external and internal clients, and community engagement. So we focus on justice by focusing on those 5 C's. They all take priority. None is more important than the other. And so, when we come across a necessity to focus on, for example, you mentioned opioids and social media. That's consumer protection oriented stuff. And, we accord the level of attention to those types of issues as is necessary and appropriate for effectuating justice. In the criminal justice context, comparably, right? There are so many different actions that we have going on within our jurisdiction that it's unfair to call any of it a priority because it's all a priority. But, in the consumer protection context, I will say that the questions to be asked are, what's the impact that an action is having on Nevadans? And if that impact is a detrimental one, then we look to see if that is as a result of improper activity, right? I said in that order because generally that's how we receive information. We'll get a complaint from a constituent saying, I went to Acme Corporation to buy a widget, and that widget ended up, not working, right? And that gives rise to an investigation where we go and ask questions and interact with probably your clients, Eric, to ask them, what's going on here? Is this a one-off, or is this what you're about? Either way it goes, we need to rectify the situation. Sometimes, again, through conversations with our colleagues, either on the Democratic side or our bipartisan organizations, we hear what's happening elsewhere, and it gives rise to us asking questions ourselves. Some people don't like that. They don't like the fact that Attorney General talk and share notes. But it is one of the most effective ways of ensuring that constituents are taken care of. People may not like it, but they will love it when they're the ones on the other end of some detrimental activity. And so we relish in the opportunity to share notes and to work together. Those are a couple of ways that we, as I've indicated, prioritize what's going on.
Well, that's an incredibly insightful answer. And first of all, I should say all of my clients, of course, are innocent. So you're not talking about my clients. But hypothetically, you're absolutely right, General Ford. I mean, when my clients or Michelle's clients or other members of the defense bar, when our clients get a letter, maybe it's a CID, civil investigative demand for the listeners, a subpoena from a state attorney general, from the Federal Trade Commission, whoever it may be, that's one of the questions. Why us? How did the attorney general become aware of this alleged conduct? You mentioned consumer complaints. How else? Information sharing. Do you get referrals from the FTC? Things like that?
Absolutely. And we work with the federal government all the time with joint investigations, joint litigations. But let me back up a little bit, Eric, because there's an important preface to everything we're saying. And Michelle, you'll appreciate this. You were with Mark Herring in the Virginia AG's office. And one of the important things about these coalitions of associations, the Attorney General Alliance, the National Association of Attorneys General, DAGA and RAGA, is that we get together and you come and represent your clients. We get to meet you. We get to know who you are. We get to understand what your businesses are. What's happening, what's percolating, what's on the rise, what's on the decline, right? We get to know you. I don't know, Michelle, if you were still with the office when we had a meeting with DAGA in Scottsdale. I don't know if you traveled much a lot with DAGA, but we had a meeting in Scottsdale. And I remember being on the dais, and I was talking to some of your colleagues. And I said, there's an old saying that says it's not what you know, but who you know. I would say it's even not who you know, it's who knows you, right? Because here's the deal. I know a lot of people know me, but I don't know them, right? At the end of the day, a lot of people know Attorney General Aaron Ford. They know my name. They think they know me, but I don't know them. And so if I were to get a complaint from Acme Corporation, about Acme Corporation, if I don't know them, for all that I know, this could be entirely indicative of the way this organization operates. They're deceitful, they're conniving, they are underhanded, and I'm about to go get them, right? But if I've had a conversation with Eric's client is Acme, and I know Acme is always, generally speaking, on the up and up, is interested in addressing issues before it gets out of hand. I can say, I just got a complaint about Acme. Let me call Eric right quick and say, Eric, I just got this complaint. What's going on? You'll look into it. You come back and you can say, General Ford, thank you for bringing it to our attention. We will address it. And then I don't have to run to the immediate CID, civil investigative demand or whatever the case may be, right? And so that's why I said I wanted to back up to say we do get complaints from all over the place. But what's frankly more important than the complaint is the relationship that your clients have with the regulators and the policymakers. That's not to say that because you have a relationship, I'm not going to get you, right? Because if Acme Corporation is indeed misbehaving and violating my Deceptive Trade Practice Act, I'm going to hold them accountable. But it won't be out of the blue. It won't be, where did this come from? It will have occurred over the course of conversation where it may not even be litigation. It may be you've recognized we had an issue, we want to address it, and here's a resolution, and we're done.
Could not agree more that maintaining credibility, from our side with regulators like you is of paramount importance. Everybody can look up what the law is. A lot of this is relationships. A lot of this is credibility. And you just raised something that's really interesting because it's a strategic decision point that people like Michelle and I face a lot, which is we're engaging with your office. If we have a meeting, do we bring the client? Do you want to hear from the talking head lawyers? Do you want to meet with the CEO directly? What do you find is most helpful for your office to make the right decision on whether to proceed with something?
So look, every office may be different. I don't know how Mark ran Virginia. I suspect I have an idea, but in my estimation, and I don't know if you're gonna like this answer, it doesn't start with the Attorney General meeting with your client. It starts with my Solicitor General, or, Michelle, you work with the General's office, right? It starts with my chief deputy on a particular issue having a conversation with his colleague, his counterpart at your client, or with you, right? As you are talking, well, probably with you before your client, right? And then the introduction occurs at that level. Because ultimately, I'm going to get briefed as the Attorney General by my Deputy Attorneys General and my Senior Deputy Attorneys General on this issue well before it gets to me. So that's how I operate my office. There's quite simply and frankly no way that I'm going to be able to take every single meeting that is requested of me. That's why I have support and assistance around here so that because by the way, you don't want me to take every meeting. I mean, you don't want to have to say I had to meet with the Attorney General. I don't think, right? We had a conversation with one of his colleagues and we got it done. That's one of the ways in which I think these issues are resolved. They're resolved at the peer-to-peer level early on, well before, and it may not take a meeting with the client. It may simply be, it might be Craig in my office talking to Eric. We heard about this, and Eric telling Craig, thank you for letting me know. My client's going to fix it. And then Craig being able to tell the constituent it's taken care of, right? And then I never even heard about it. Or it might be very bad, and eventually, we have a conversation, and we'll see how that goes.
I'm reminded of the expression, if you shoot at the king, you best not miss. And, sometimes you have to explain to the client, you don't want me going over staff's head. You don't want me to go into General Ford.
That's very real. That's very real, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because at the end of the day, like I said, we have a lot going on. Nothing takes priority, as I've indicated, because they're all priorities, including your issue, right? And so it's probably hard to fathom and quite frankly, believe the way I've just articulated it, but that's how I view it. Because every person who calls my office, their issue is the most important to them in their life, right? And by the way, I can appreciate that. So that's how I operate.
But would you view if we're representing a client and are working collaboratively with your office to try and resolve the issue, then that's in the best interest of everyone, that we can represent our clients in a way that aligns also with the AG's office, and we don't need to view a regulator necessarily as an adverse party. It can begin with a relationship where you try to solve a problem together.
Absolutely, right? Because like I said, in my office, our job is justice. And we ask this question quite literally. What does justice look like here? Does justice look like me taking Acme to court and bankrupting it and putting people out of jobs because of a one-off mistake that occurred with one of my constituents? Or does justice look like getting recompense for my one-off mistake that my constituent was on the other end of, and having Acme Corporation change internal policies and practices to ensure it doesn't happen again, and then let everybody go about their merry way, right? These are very real questions. And sometimes the answer is justice requires me to put you out of business. And we did that with some opioid companies, for example, right? Because we saw that the actions were so egregious and intentional and harmful that the only proper response from a justice perspective was to put them out of business, right? There are others where we were able to say, okay, you participated, not at the same level as some others, and we think a settlement, would be commensurate relative to the amount of damage you brought, and go that way. And so it is with the relationship, Michelle, where that conversation begins to take place, and I think that's important.
Well, I'm happy to move on to questions about working with the federal government. AG Ford, how would you mentioned your relationship with the federal government. You mentioned that Nevada has sued the federal government both under the prior administration, or there's the prior Trump administration, and then the Biden administration, then the current administration. And in fact, I was thrilled to work with your office on one of those cases, suing what was then the Biden administration over the Equal Rights Amendment. Taking a step back from there, how would you view your relationship with the federal government? Is it something that varies depending on the matter? And what's your dynamic in terms of working with different agencies and DOJ at a federal level?
So it depends. The fact of the matter is we would love to have a cordial working relationship with the federal government at all times. But here's the reality. Sometimes the federal government's perspective on the law, rights, and the ways in which our constituents should be treated differs from the way we think things should be taking place. And so what you see sometimes, unfortunately, is partisan bickering between Democratic attorneys general and Republican federal administrations when the president's Republican, and vice versa. Republican attorneys general always attacking a Democratic president. Here's a distinction that makes a big difference in my mind. Why are you engaging in those types of fights? For me, it's a two-pronged test. The first of which is what you're doing violating the law, number one. Number two, is it detrimentally impacting Nevadans? If both of those things are taking place, I have an obligation as the top law enforcement officer in the state, as the consumer protector in the state, as the people's lawyer, to engage, right? And those two questions are the exact same ones I asked whether it was President Biden or President Trump, which is the reason why, Michelle, you and I got to go watch the equal rights argument at the D.C. Court of Appeals. We did not prevail at the end of the day on that one, but we did prevail when it came to mifepristone. And we sued the Biden administration in Oregon over the ways in which his FDA was engaging with the mifepristone debate and prevailed. We thought it violated the law and it negatively impacted Nevadans. Comparably, now we have a President Trump 2.0. We have sued him over 30 times, not lost one time, because the analysis is it violating the law and is it detrimentally impacting? I might disagree with your policy, but I firmly believe that to the victor goes the spoils, right? You get the right to implement your plans, your policies, your platform, the promises you ran on, but you got to do so lawfully. And if you don't, you got to see me in court. Those are the ways in which our relationships are kind of forged. That said, that's the professional side of the relationship. The personal side of the relationship is, as a general matter, we're able to engage in cordial conversation, sometimes agree to disagree agreeably, and just understand that we all are doing a job, potentially with a difference of opinion, but generally speaking, for the exact same goal of effectuating justice in the way that we interpret it.
And I love how the ethos of focusing on justice, because when you're representing the government, and for those lawyers who have the opportunity to work in government, whether it be state government or local government or federal government, you know that you're not just representing your individual clients, you're also representing the government as an institution. And there's a certain way of litigating that you learn to litigate with a level of respect and kindness to the judicial system, that sometimes the system itself is adversarial, but the relationships between people don't have to be adversarial.
Right, I agree. And our system, to your point, Michelle, is actually built to fight, right? We have an adversarial system in courts. And so, yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise that there's an adversarial relationship between us sometimes. But as you've indicated, there's a way to do it.
Well, so as a former state solicitor general, I'd be remiss to not raise the role of solicitors general in AG offices. And you had mentioned your solicitor general, and I know you have really talented people from your SG's office who've gone on to serve other important roles in your administration. And so each AG's office, at least from what I've observed, each solicitor general serves a slightly different role in each AG's office. So what's been your experience working with your solicitor general's office, and how do you view their role in your administration?
Yeah, I think you're right that it does vary office to office. I was fortunate. When I was elected to this office in 2018, a person with whom I clerked on the Ninth Circuit was working here. She wasn't the Solicitor General. She was working in our post-conviction unit, back to your earlier question. She was the chief of that division. But when I won, she called me and said, one of the things she remembered I told her a long time ago was that you got to ask if you want something. And if you don't ask, you definitely won't get it. So she told me, I want to be your Solicitor General. And I said, well, you got it. And so our relationship of 20 years of knowing one another, having worked together as clerks on the Ninth Circuit, has led to a very trusting, amicable, cordial relationship where I know that Heidi Perry Stern knows that our job is justice. She's going to ask what justice looks like in everything that falls within her purview, and that she's going to focus on the 5 C's as we engage in that analysis. And so part of her job, in addition to arguing appellate cases before our state Supreme Court or our appellate courts, is to also train others to do that. So she does mock moot courts. As you can tell, I don't litigate that much, right? Or do appellate work that much. I would do a mock trial before I did a moot court. But anyway, she moots cases, she advises. She also runs my multistate work, right? And so when we are talking about, and by run, I don't mean the litigation component, she analyzes the matters for recommendation to me on whether we should engage further on things that are happening at a multi-state level, viewing it through the lens of what does justice require and which seat does this fall under for us to engage in. So if we get an inquiry from the Virginia Solicitor General's office about an amicus brief to be filed against Acme Corporation, she's going to make that analysis for me and make the recommendation. If we get a comment letter from the DC Attorney General asking us to opine on a federal regulation coming in, she's going to analyze it from a justice perspective and make a recommendation to me on those types of things. Now that we have more work relative to the state-federal relationship, the sovereignty issue I talked about, she's analyzing those things and getting me suggestions and recommendations on whether we should join in on efforts to do certain things. And so she has a very busy job, and she has a small shop. She has deputy solicitors general, but she also oversees my complex litigation division. She's not a litigator, she's an appellate lawyer, but she has within her reporting line my chief of complex litigation. And so she also has to engage in conversations around decisions in that arena, assigning folks to the litigation team for appellate purposes and review later on. So she stays very busy.
What about the opinions function in your office? Does that run through the Solicitor General's office as well?
It does. Thank you. Sorry, she got a big job, like I said, and I can't remember all of it. But yes, absolutely. When we get requests for official Attorney General opinions, she receives those, analyzes those, assigns them out, receives back the work product, massages it, and sends it to me for consideration. That's absolutely part of what her job is.
That's one of the areas that I find that folks who focus primarily and work primarily in the private sector, sometimes they're interested in learning more about an attorney general's opinions function, because that's something that's so valuable in learning what the attorney general's view is of an issue that might not have been litigated yet. Is there anything that you think would be helpful to share with our audience about the role of an attorney general in issuing AG opinions?
So it may vary state to state. I suspect it does. We have a statute that determines when we can engage in an analysis that would lead toward an official attorney general opinion. And that request can only come from certain entities. Acme Corporation can't ask me for an AGO, not under my statute. It has to be let's say, for example, Acme Corporation operates within the transportation arena. It has to be the transportation agency, the state agency, asking me a question they would like an opinion on because it's unsettled in the law, right? And so your clients should know that, right? If they are interacting with a regulator in our state and has a difference of opinion on things, maybe they can suggest to that regulator that they can ask the Attorney General's office to issue an opinion. We're not required to, by the way. We're not required to issue an opinion, even when I say that. I'm pretty positive we're not required to. My boss, Heidi Perry Stern, would let me know if I'm required to or not. But as a general matter, I think we do retain some level of discretion on whether to issue it. Because sometimes the suggestion would be, let me just give you some client advice, as opposed to putting this into an attorney general opinion, especially if it's such a unique niche type issue that probably won't have applicability beyond a current factual circumstance that they're presented with. So those are some of the things your clients might want to know about relative to AGOs.
And this whole discussion about how the private sector can engage constructively with your office, I think our audience would find that to be really useful. So, we appreciate you offering your insights there. And we've touched on it already, whether it's meetings, maybe it's not through a formal advisory opinion request. Are there any other ways that you might suggest that the private sector work constructively with your office, either you directly or perhaps your staff?
I mean, look, I've mentioned, I don't know how people will take this, but I've mentioned these organizations there, NAG, National Association of Attorneys General, the Attorney General Alliance. We have substantive CLE sessions several times throughout the year. DAGA and RAGA have substantive meetings. We have 4 of them a year, and then a 5th in the summer with a smaller group of folks. These are great opportunities to come out and meet people in a non-adversarial, setting that allows for amicable conversation, that allows for opportunities to ask questions that might otherwise not be able to be asked, right? And I don't mean that in a way that, these are like secret conversations. I'm just saying, you don't even know what you don't know until you sitting down across a table from someone having dinner with them, that this is an important question to ask someone. So I would strongly encourage you and your clients to, if they're not already, engage with some of these associations of attorneys general so that they can meet attorneys general, and not just attorneys general, our staff members. Michelle was Solicitor General. It would be good for them to know who she was, it seems to me, because I'm probably going to refer you to her anyway, right? So you come on, show up, go talk to her and figure out, what the best way to connect with people afterwards is.
It's really great insight. Thanks.
Well, I just wanted to, as we're kind of closing in on our time here, ask a little bit about some trends that you see looking ahead in the world of AG enforcement. Are there any issues or trends you see shaping the future of state attorney general enforcement?
Yeah, look, we said enforcement. I don't know if I'm specifically speaking to enforcement. Yeah, it touches on it. My answer, I'm thinking through my head if it is entirely applicable to what your question is, and I think it is. Look, the law is changing so rapidly now in terms of the way it's being interpreted by the courts, specifically the Supreme Court, right? Agency deference, for example, doesn't exist like it did when I was in law school under Chevron, right? It's an entirely different analysis. My son just finished his first year in law school, and what he's learning right now is coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court 25 years after I was taking classes. It's funny because I was at the Ohio State University when Senator Dale Connor wrote the Michigan case that said maybe in 25 years we won't need affirmative action. 25 years later, we have an opinion that is saying we don't need affirmative action, right? To my dismay, to be clear, I disagree with that opinion. But these things are happening and changing so quickly now that I do see on the horizon continued confusion based on the newness of some of the precedent that's coming out. Confusion not in the sense that we don't know what we're doing, but confusion in the sense that there's going to be a lot of arguments relative to what does exactly this decision now mean for the ways in which we can interact with corporations or with citizenry or whatever the case may be. And I also think, to be frank with you, the current administration is testing the limits of the law. And that on the horizon for the next 3 years at a minimum, 3.5 years at a minimum, will continue to be an active part of what attorneys general are doing, trying to continue to restrain the executive, to find the balance in the federalist system in which we live, right? And to understand what the parameters are relative to whether it's immigration or domestic issues. That's on the horizon. And I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon.
And we're fresh off the Supreme Court term. And the last day of the Supreme Court term, the court issued an important decision about nationwide injunctions.
Right.
Back when I was in AG world, there was the question of, is something illegal? But then also the question of, we have limited resources as our state. Do we have to get involved in this litigation, or is there the possibility we don't get involved? There's a nationwide injunction. Our citizens are still protected by the decision. Do you find that in light of the Supreme Court's recent decision and the fact that the Supreme Court recognized that states might be differently situated, do you find yourself, I know it's not even been a week yet, but, and our podcast will probably be released when it's been longer than a week, but given how fresh that decision is, do you think that will impact some of your analysis about your role as an attorney general representing the state and what issues you get involved in?
Already is. Because look, I've been engaged in my office with over 30 lawsuits right now. And so I'm not concerned about whether a nationwide injunction is proper because I'm covered. The residents of my state have an attorney general who has stood up over 30 times and has prevailed over 30 times on issues of law to protect what we consider to be rights that have been abridged by the federal government. We're covered. What has also happened, though, is that because we've been able to get nationwide injunctions, other attorneys general in other states have been riding our coattails. Their residents have been covered as well. I'm from Texas originally, born and raised. My mama's still down there. My grandma's there. My wife's folks are there. My entire family's in Texas. And, Ken Paxton and I have a different opinion on the ways in which things should be happening right now. He's not participating in these lawsuits. But up to last week, I was less concerned about what impact him not joining the birthright citizenship case would mean to my family down in Texas, as an example, right? But now I got to wonder, if Texas and Florida and Georgia and these other states don't get involved, their residents will be the ones who suffer the consequence because they decided not to get engaged. And comparably, even though I don't have a lot of money in my office, Michelle, if I don't get engaged on a case because I intend to ride a coattail this time, I got to think twice about it because I might not be able to ride that coattail. You're right. And the court did acknowledge states are in a different circumstance or different position than others. And so that's why I say confusion is going to continue to creep in because now we're going to litigate what that means. What does it mean? What does it mean, right? They remanded the birthright citizenship cases. I'm confident we're going to prevail both in Massachusetts and Washington State, I think it was the other state, because we do think there's no way we can get full relief without a nationwide injunction issuing on birthright citizenship, for example. But is that the same case when it comes to the funding of federal monies in the amounts of trillions of dollars? Is it only going to apply now to the 22 states who sued to stop the funding? Or is it going to be afforded the ability to apply to the other 28 that did not join? And so these are very real issues that will continue to be argued in the courts. It ain't, excuse my colloquialism, it's all fun to get in there and argue, but it's not academic. This isn't just an academic exercise. Very real people in all of these states throughout the entire country are going to be the ones suffering the consequences of these types of debates, in my estimation. So that's a long answer. I soapboxed it a little bit. My apologies, but I hope I answered your question, though.
You definitely did.
Yeah, I mean, I would say your answer begs so many questions that we could. I think the options are to extend this podcast for another hour, which we're not going to do out of respect for your time. And the better option is to revisit this conversation, hopefully with you in a future episode, because this was just a wonderful conversation. Michelle and I deeply appreciate it. Appreciate your time, your insights, your expertise. And I know that Nevadans, did I pronounce that right?
Close. Nevadans.
Close. Nevadans appreciate all that you do for them, General Ford. So thank you very much. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. This is a really, really wonderful discussion. So we appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Y'all take care.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to On the Agenda from Steptoe. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss future episodes. To learn more about Steptoe, visit steptoe.com. When the stakes are high, experience matters.